Hello, my beautiful buds. Welcome back to my channel, Sprouts with Joy. My name is Joy, and if you like to talk about plants, you're in the right place. Today is a bit of a controversial topic, and that is low light and plants that can survive and kind of do relatively well in low light. Okay, before you pull out your like pitchforks and whatnot, I am aware the vast majority of houseplants will probably prefer medium to bright indirect light. That is a sweet spot where they won't get burned or super chlorotic usually, but they'll also grow and give you growth that looks mature, looks beautiful, is shapely, and also relatively fast. But based on my experience as a plant parent, there are some plants that you can actually, you can get away with putting them in darker corners. Yes, this list of plants is not just plants that generally would do well in lower light or survive or whatever. I'm going to literally show you the plants in my collection that get the lowest amount of light, and I'm specifically going to be using a unit of measurement. It's not just going to be, oh, well, it's like kind of far from a window and looks dim. No, we are going to be using a light meter. And this measures in foot candles. Again, plants need light to survive, so you can't just put them in a situation that has zero light at all, okay? And if you do put them in low light, they're not going to grow as fast. They might not look as pretty. They might get leggy. But I just wanted to share with you, hey, if you have a space where you want to put a plant, but it's a little bit lower light, I just wanted to share with you what my experience was and what plants you might be able to kind of get away with in a darker corner. Now, as far as foot candles go and what would be considered low light versus high light versus medium light and all those things, I had a bit of a hard time finding resources on the internet that were consistent. I think that's mostly due to the fact that the standards for in a greenhouse versus growing plants in your home are gonna be different, and same for being outside. I'll link down below a few articles that I found helpful, but generally speaking, low light is 25 to 100 foot candles. Medium light is 100 to 500 foot candles. High light is 500 to 1,000 foot candles. And direct sunlight is gonna be over 1,000 foot candles. Of course, over the course of the day, whether it's morning, noon, evening, and kind of where the windows are in your room, the foot candles are going to change. Of course they are. And most of our plants, if they are going by sunlight and not by artificial light, they're getting an inconsistent number of foot candles throughout the day, just by nature of clouds covering the sun and the sun being a different direction in the sky. So most of our plants are experiencing those fluctuations anyways. However, I've been kind of roughly keeping track of those fluctuations, so I will be sure to note that with each plant. The first plant is my Maranta Leuconura erythronera, I think. It's the red-veined one. This plant has been in arguably the lowest amount of light of any of my plants ever for the longest amount of time. It's in our built-in, which does not get any direct light. It's all ambient, and in fact, it's a little bit shaded because it's kind of in a cubby. And I love having it there because it's really, really cute, but it really does not get a lot of light, at all. At the lowest level of light in the day, if it's a gloomy day, it'll only get maybe 5 foot candles, if we're lucky. But right now it's pretty sunny, and I went ahead and just measured it, and it got up to about 16 foot candles. So I would be safe to say that this plant pretty much only receives 5 to 15 foot candles, fluctuating throughout the day, which is really freaking low. But this plant, believe it or not, is still growing. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to show you. Yeah, see, it's literally still growing. It's got that, and it has a few other growth points too, right here. Yeah. Now, to be fair, that growth has changed in color. When I used to have this plant in higher light, the leaves were really deep and beautiful like this. But since I've moved it to lower light, I've noticed that it has kind of lost that deep, intense color. So that is something to bear in mind when you have a plant in lower light. It's gonna change its behavior, most likely. It's either gonna grow more slowly, or the leaves might come in a different color, or they might be smaller leaves, or it might get leggy. So its behavior is gonna change, but it's a trade-off, you know, because otherwise you wouldn't have a plant in that space. And yeah, you could get a fake plant, but I just don't want to. There's something in me that's very stubborn, and I don't want to get a fake plant. So a real plant it is, but it's still doing, honestly, not that bad. And I think it's been there for almost 6 months at this point. It's been a long time. So I'm very shocked at how well it's doing, all things considered. I have noticed that plants that have red backs like this tend to do more okay in lower light. It's not that they necessarily prefer to be in extreme low light like this plant is in, but they seem to fare a little bit better. Occasionally, like maybe once or twice a week, I'll feel bad for this plant. And this is like the one plant that I will kind of pick up and I'll move it in front of the window for a couple hours every so often, just to give it a little bit more food to survive. But it's, you know, that's not its typical living situation. So yes, this one I actually would highly recommend if you have a lower light place. Not no light, but it's questionable. This might be a good candidate for you. The next plants I'm going to talk about are actually all the plants that are behind me. Over here, all these plants are in what I would consider to be very low light most of the time. Let's see, at this very moment, the sun is out, it's late afternoon, so there's a west-facing window on the other side of this room. And right here it's measuring about 13-foot candles. Over here it's more like 18 to 20-ish. But generally speaking, this area is just pretty much always low light. Sometimes it'll get as low as about 10-foot candles and as high as 25 to 30-foot candles for very short periods of the day. During the winter time, when the sun is lower, there's actually more light that comes into this room and shines directly on these plants for about 45 minutes in the evening. But that's only in the winter time, not even in the summertime. So at that period of time, it would probably be closer to like 200-foot candles for like 45 minutes, maybe once a day if it's a sunny day in the winter. So I'll just go over each of these plants. This right here is a philodendron hederaceum, or heartleaf philodendron. I've noticed that the leaves definitely come in way tinier when they don't get a lot of light. Like that does make a big difference for this plant, because I have another one of these that's growing in a higher light situation. Not by much, but it's more medium light than low light. And the leaves are much larger, like they're coming in, they're growing in larger, like these top leaves. But honestly, this plant's still growing, like it's still putting off new growth. It's still pretty. I like it here, so I'm gonna keep it here. Right here is a snake plant. Of course, I feel like you can't have one of these low light videos without featuring a snake plant. This is my Sansevieria moonshine, and I haven't had it here for very long, so I can't really speak to it all that much. I'm trying to decide whether or not I want to move it, because being in a lower light situation has made it lose some of its like pale, bright color. And I would rather retain that quality of the Sansevieria moonshine, because that's one of the reasons that I really like the plant. But I just thought it looked nice there and it was like a good fit, so that's why I put it there to begin with. But yeah, people will often say, I mean, Sansevieria, they're very resilient, they're very tough, so they can go a long time without water and they can survive and be stable in a low light environment for a very long period of time. However, they're not really gonna grow in that circumstance. They just won't. They're notorious for being slow growers, but I've found personally that they're only really super slow growers if you have them in low to medium light. But if you have them in a brighter situation, which I do have a couple of Sansevieria that are in highlight situations, and they grow a lot. So keep that in mind. It will survive, but it will be more like a piece of art. This right here is another variety of Philodendron Hederaceum, but it's the lemon lime. And this one, I have debated putting in a higher light situation because I don't think that it's necessarily thrived, but you know, it still has grown, just at a much slower rate. But again, I think that it's lost some of its bright color, and maybe it would get that back if I had it in brighter light. But again, we all know if it's gonna be in low light, it's just not going to be ideal. It's just not going to grow the way that you would want it to in an ideal circumstance. But like, this whole setup is so cute, and I love this corner, and I did set up this corner kind of before I had a better idea of like how much light plants actually needed. I was like, oh, I want plants here. It's decor and I like the look of it. So I put them here, and then I realized after the fact, oh, that might not be the best spot for plants to thrive. But again, I like the way that it looks. It's a setup that I already have. And these are plants that I found will be okay. Are they exploding with growth all the time? Not necessarily, but they do still grow. And I mean, hey, if that's what you're looking for, relative contentment, there you go. Here's another one. It's my Cebu Blue Pothos. This is another one I actually have considered moving into a higher light situation because I want it to grow faster, and I want the color to be more impressive, but it does grow, and it has survived for over a year in this spot, in this incredibly low light spot. And this one actually gets like even lower light than any of the other ones. It's more like pretty much only ever 10-foot candles all the time. But again, I mean, I think this is a relatively new leaf, as is this one. So it has new growth sometimes, but it's very occasional. So I think that this plant would actually benefit a lot from being in higher light, at least medium light. I think it would really enjoy. All right, this right here is yet another Philodendron Hederaceum variety. I've found that Philodendron Hederaceum cultivars do really well in lower light for the most part, but this is a Philodendron Brazil, and this one has actually, when I first got this plant, it was about here, I want to say. Actually, no, it was probably more like here. Like, it wasn't even trailing beyond the bottom of the pot. And now it's here, and it's maybe been a year and a half, if that. And pretty much the entire time it's lived right here. So this has grown unbelievably well in pretty low light. This does get more light than this corner. It does get up to maybe 30-foot candles. And occasionally these bottom leaves here will actually get some distant direct sunlight when the sun sets for about 30 minutes. But for the most part, this plant's getting lower light. One thing that I do miss about this not being in highlight is that Philodendron Brazil does sun stress really, really nicely. Like, the leaves themselves aren't necessarily extremely sun stressed, but it's more like the petioles get really like orange and peachy, and I do miss that a lot. But I think it's still a beautiful plant, and I have another Philodendron Brazil that's hanging out in a west facing window that I think is gonna wind up with the sun stressing that I like. But I really love how it looks here. It's absolutely gorgeous cascading down this wall, so I don't regret having it here, and it has continued to grow really well. So in fact, Philodendron Brazil might be one of my top recommendations for a lower light situation. All right, this right here is a Scindapsus pictus argyrius. And I really like this plant. For a while, I was getting annoyed with it because it was putting off a lot of runners. But ever since the summer has come along, it has stopped putting off runners. Although, I mean, this is all new growth just from this month. So even though it's in a low light situation, it has grown very quickly. However, these leaves are very small when you compare it to the rest of the plant. I think that Scindapsus are pretty prone to putting off runners if they are not climbing something, and or if they don't get enough light. So do bear that in mind. You might need to trim the runners off. It might also be related to fertilizing. Honestly, I haven't totally pinned it down. I just know that for the longest time, like all winter long, I was trimming off runners, and then all of a sudden it was like, boom, it changed its mind and decided to give me leaves, which I think is wonderful because I really enjoy this plant. I do think that this plant would definitely benefit from having more light so that it could potentially grow bigger leaves, but it's doing fine in this circumstance. This right here is my philodendron Mia, and she just chills out on my coffee bar very far away from any windows. It's kind of in the corner of my kitchen. In that kitchen, there are 2 south-facing windows and 1 east-facing window, but they're all like completely, totally far away. The south-facing windows are on the opposite end of the room, probably 13, 15 feet away maybe. And then the east-facing window is probably 8 feet away, but it's like blocked slightly by the fridge. Yeah, it doesn't get a whole lot of light. So on a gloomy day, I have measured this at around 5.5 foot candles. On a bright day, like at midday, I've also measured it at about 25 foot candles. And in the morning, when the morning light is coming in, for a couple of hours, it might get up to more like 50 foot candles. But all that is still pretty low light for the most part. Definitely this plant has felt it with putting out some pretty small growth. It really does not grow very quickly, and this growth right here is stuck, as philodendrons sometimes do. And this one is kind of like the snake plant here, where I'm not really anticipating every leaf. I'm not trying to get it to grow like I would some of my other, like, I don't know, Philodendron Splendid, or my Monstera type constellation, my Hoya, or my Anthurium. Like, I feel bad, but you know, not all plants are equal in my heart. Some of them I'm looking forward to every single new leaf, but this one is more like a piece of art. It's a living art. And not to say that my other plants are not that, but my other plants are more like pets to me and how much I pamper them. Whereas this one is more of like, oh, it's a piece of art that's nice and I don't expect it to do anything. And it's incredibly easy to care for. It's very drought tolerant and it's very vocal. So I can just tell by looking at it if it needs water, and it only needs water maybe every 1.5 to 2 weeks. It's really not that demanding. So if you're looking for a plant that's just easy to take care of, and I've never had a pest on this, it's not going to be the most eye-catching plant in your collection, but it's going to survive probably, and it's going to be a splash of green in an area that otherwise might not have any. Philodendron Mia might just be your gal. This right here is a neon pothos, and pothos in general is often a plant that people will recommend for low light situations, which sometimes I could agree with, but honestly, in my personal experience, I would definitely recommend any Philodendron Hederaceum cultivar for the most part over a pothos for a lower light situation. But that's mostly based on my own personal experience. I just feel like in general, they seem to do better. But yeah, this is my neon pothos, and this is one plant that I would... Does it freaking have mealybugs? Maybe that's not. I don't know. I just saw a white fuzzy and that makes me think it has mealybugs, but maybe it's just dust. I'll investigate later. But this plant, I don't feel like it's ever doing well. It's kind of floppy right now. I literally just watered it yesterday because it, you know, I don't know. Its unhappiness could be more due to underwatering than due to the lack of light, but it's probably honestly a mixture of both. This is probably the one plant on this list that I would be like, maybe skip on having it in lower light. I'm pretty sure this one pretty typically gets like 10 to 20 foot candles consistently throughout the day. And it's just in a corner in my bedroom. And it's kind of squashed between, there's a west facing window and there's a north facing window, but it's getting only ambient light because those windows are just, they're not facing the plant. They're facing anywhere but the plant, basically. So yeah, this plant just pretty much gets the ambient light in the room from that west facing window and 2 north facing windows, which isn't much. But I never really noticed this plant growing. I've had it for at least 2 years at this point, and I feel like it has not really done anything. I know that it's put out new leaves, and it's certainly lost some leaves, but it just has never thrived for me. So I don't know if I love this plant or if I should even have this plant. Or maybe I have tried this in a higher light situation though, and I feel like it didn't do any better. So maybe it's a problem with this plant, like the specific specimen that I got from Home Depot. And I think the last plant that I was going to talk about today is my jade pothos, and then I have a tridescantia and water right next to it, but I'm not really going to count that because that's not a permanent situation. It hasn't been there for long. But the jade pothos there has been routinely in a low light situation, not necessarily in that specific spot, but in a lot of different spots. And yeah, for the most part, it gets just like 10-foot candles of light. It's about 15 feet away from a north facing window is my guess. Maybe more, like maybe a little bit under that, but like that's pretty much all it's getting. It's gotten a little bit more light since I installed my greenhouse cabinet because, you know, the grow light from that kind of sheds light on that plant. But yeah, for the most part, it's really not a lot of light. And yet it still grows, albeit very, very slowly. Although at this point, I've had it in that pot for about 2.5 years, and I think that it's getting root bound because the growth, I've noticed, has severely slowed down. So I think that on top of not having very much light, it definitely is gonna need some sort of a repot sometime in the near future, which I'm not really looking forward to because that means I'll have to take all the vines down. But you know, it's fine. That is one pothos though. I mean, the jade pothos, it's all green. It's got a lot of chlorophyll. It has a lot of opportunity to utilize its photosynthesis powers. So yeah, of all the different pothos that are out there, I probably wouldn't recommend the more variegated ones to be in lower light situations like the Marble Queen pothos. I mean, maybe it would be fine, but I feel like that one needs more light to do well, whereas the jade pothos you can kind of get away with. Well, I think those are all the plants of mine that are in very low light situations. I have some that are still considered low light, but they do get some spurts of sunlight here and there. And yeah, I just wanted to share with you guys like the plants in my collection personally that get the lowest amount of light and kind of cover how they're doing with it. So yeah, hopefully this helps you make a more informed decision regarding like, hey, you might have a slightly darker corner and you want to put a plant there. Yeah, maybe this will help you kind of weigh your options. And yeah, again, this is not an exhaustive list. These are plants like literally in my own collection that I've had in these low light situations for several months, if not years. I'd love to hear down in the comments what your experience has been with keeping plants in lower light situations. If you have any recommendations for plants that you think would do really well, yeah, just comment down below, help each other out, and yeah, subscribe if you want to. And I hope that you guys have a wonderful and blessed day. Bye-bye!